starting with number 1 Fokker Doctor I triplane Germany, 1917. Germany's Fokker Doctor I entered the Western Front in the autumn of 1917 as a highly maneuverable dogfighter made famous by Manfred von Richthofen. But its construction concealed a fatal defect. Upper wing failures caused by moisture-penetrating, poorly laminated wooden spars resulted in in-flight structural collapses. Several experienced pilots were killed before the entire fleet was grounded for inspection and reinforcement in late 1917. The aircraft that symbolized German air power was, for a period, genuinely unsafe to fly, not because of enemy fire, but because of the wood holding its wings together. 2. Sopwith Camel, United Kingdom, 1917. The Sopwith Camel was Britain's most successful fighter of the First World War by aerial victories, but it killed more pilots in training than any other Allied aircraft of the conflict. Its rotary engine generated enormous gyroscopic torque, causing violent left-turn tendencies and catastrophic right-turn snap rolls at low altitude. Inexperienced pilots who lost control during takeoff or low-level maneuvering had almost no time to recover. Estimates suggest the Camel killed approximately 385 pilots in accidents, a figure that rivaled its combat losses and defined its dual legacy as both lethal weapon and dangerous machine. 3. Fokker D.8, Germany, 1918. Germany's Fokker D.8 arrived at the end of the First World War as a fast, cantilever monoplane of genuinely advanced design. But structural failures in its wing spar caused multiple fatal crashes within weeks of frontline deployment. Investigations revealed that repair depots had incorrectly modified the wing spars during assembly, reversing the taper and critically weakening the structure under load. Pilots were dying not because the design was inherently flawed, but because wartime production pressure had corrupted the construction process. The D.8 was grounded repeatedly while Germany's air war was in its final months. 4. Brewster F-2A Buffalo, United States, 1939. The Brewster Buffalo entered service as a modern naval fighter, but was rendered catastrophically obsolete almost immediately. When encountered the Mitsubishi A6M0 over Malaya and the Dutch East Indies in 1941 and 1942, Allied pilots found themselves in an aircraft that was slower, less maneuverable, and less armed than their opponents. American Marine pilots at Midway flying Buffaloes suffered devastating losses. 13 of the 25 aircraft that engaged Japanese forces were destroyed. Survivors reported the aircraft was completely outclassed. It was not a dangerous, designed by the standards of 1939. It became a death sentence by 1942. 5. Bell P-39 Airacobra, United States, 1941. The P-39 Airacobra placed its Allison engine behind the pilot, connected to the propeller by a drive shaft running beneath the cockpit, an unconventional arrangement that shifted weight distribution and created dangerous spin characteristics. Above 15,000 feet, performance deteriorated sharply, making it ineffective against German and Japanese fighters at combat altitude. American pilots discarded it from frontline fighter roles quickly. Soviet forces used it successfully at low altitude in a ground attack role. But for pilots trained to expect standard handling, the P-39's tendency toward flat spins with little warning made it genuinely treacherous during training operations. 6. Lavochkin-Gorbanov-Gudkov Lag. 3. Soviet Union, 1941. Soviet pilots called it the Lakarovany Garantirovany Grob, the varnished guaranteed coffin. The Lag-3 was constructed of wood and delta-wood composite, heavy relative to its underpowered engine and sluggish at the altitudes where the Messerschmitt Bf-109 held every advantage. It was rushed into mass production in 1941 because the Soviet Air Force needed numbers, not refinement. Pilots assigned to it in the catastrophic opening phase of Operation Barbarossa flew against experienced Luftwaffe opponents in an aircraft they knew was inferior. The nickname they gave it required no translation to understand. 7. Nakajima 43 Hayabusa, Japan, 1941. Japan's Ki-43 Hayabusa was agile, long-ranged, and well-liked by pilots who had mastered it. But it was built with no armor protection and no self-sealing fuel tanks in its early production variants. A single accurate burst from Allied fighters was frequently sufficient to ignite the aircraft. Japanese aviation doctrine prioritized performance and range over survivability, a philosophy that proved catastrophic as Allied firepower increased and Japanese pilot quality declined through attrition. Inexperienced pilots late in the war flew an unprotected aircraft with demanding handling characteristics against opponents far better equipped and trained. The outcome was predictable and consistent. 8. Heinkel He-162 Volksjäger, Germany, 1945. Germany's He-162 was designed, built, and placed in operational service in approximately 90 days, one of the most accelerated development timelines in aviation history. Its BMW 003 turbojet was mounted above the fuselage to simplify construction, but bonding failures in the wooden nose section, caused by substandard wartime adhesives, resulted in structural disintegration in flight during testing and early operations. The aircraft was intended to be flown by Hitler youth recruits with minimal training. Several He-162s broke apart in the air before the program ended. Speed and ideology had overtaken basic engineering discipline entirely. 9. Lockheed P-38 Lightning, United States, 1944. The P-38 Lightning was one of America's most capable fighters of the Second World War, but in the European theater it encountered a phenomenon that aerodynamic science had not yet resolved. During high-speed dives at altitude, airflow over the tail approached transonic conditions, causing control reversal that made the aircraft impossible to recover by conventional inputs. Pilots died before the mechanism was understood. Corrective dive recovery flaps were introduced in late 1944 and largely resolved the problem. But the Lightning's danger during that period was real, documented, and fatal. It was not a flawed aircraft. It was an aircraft that had reached the edge of what was then known. 10. De Havilland Vampire, United Kingdom, 1945. Britain's de Havilland Vampire was the RAF's second operational jet and the first to cross the Atlantic under its own power. In service with multiple nations, it accumulated a steady accident record driven by its single-engine configuration, limited ejection provisions in early marks, and the steep adaptation curve facing pilots transitioning from propeller aircraft to jets for the first time. In Royal Australian Air Force operations, the Vampire's accident rate was among the highest of any post-war type. Its danger was not concentrated in one catastrophic design flaw. It was distributed across the accumulated risk of an entire generation learning to fly in a fundamentally new environment. 11. Supermarine Swift, United Kingdom, 1954. The Supermarine Swift was rushed into RAF service under political pressure as Britain's answer to the Soviet MiG-15, formally declared operational before its development problems had been resolved. It suffered from pitch instability at high speed, unreliable gun firing behavior, and poor altitude performance. It was grounded multiple times during its frontline career and withdrawn from the fighter interception role after less than 1 year of operational service, one of the shortest active careers in RAF history. Pilots flew it during that period knowing it had not completed the safety validation normally required before operational deployment. Political urgency had replaced engineering rigor. 12. Convair F-102 Delta Dagger, United States, 1956. The F-102 Delta Dagger failed to break the sound barrier in level flight during initial testing, a fundamental problem for an aircraft designed to intercept supersonic Soviet bombers. Emergency application of Richard Whitcomb's area rule principle, reshaping the fuselage into a narrowed waist section, resolved the aerodynamic issue. But the aircraft's fire control and radar systems remained operationally unreliable throughout much of its service life. During the Vietnam War, F-102s flew combat air patrols in a role far outside their design parameters and sustained losses to ground fire. 53 F-102s were lost in Vietnam, 14 in combat, the remainder to accidents and operational causes. 13. Lockheed F-104 Starfighter, United States, 1958. The F-104 Starfighter's razor-thin wings, just 3.4 inches at their thickest point, generated minimal lift at low speeds, making takeoff and landing extraordinarily unforgiving. Its original downward-firing ejection seat offered no escape below safe altitude. The aircraft demanded absolute precision at every stage of flight and punished any deviation without warning. West Germany, which operated the F-104G in the low-altitude strike role for which it was never optimized, lost 292 aircraft and 116 pilots in peacetime operations. The German Air Force's accident rate with the Starfighter remains one of the most documented peacetime aviation disasters in NATO history. Its nickname, the Widowmaker, was not metaphorical. 14. Republic F-105 Thunderscreech, United States, 1958. The F-105 Thunderscreech was the largest single-seat, single-engine combat aircraft ever built when it entered service. Designed as a low-level nuclear strike platform and thrust into conventional warfare over North Vietnam's most heavily defended airspace. Flying fast and low through radar-guided surface-to-air missile corridors and concentrated anti-aircraft artillery, THUD pilots faced statistical attrition that was staggering. Of 833 aircraft built, 395 were lost, 312 in Southeast Asia. Nearly half the operational fleet was destroyed. Pilots who flew repeated missions over Route Package 6, the most dangerous target area, operated with full knowledge that the odds of completing a full combat tour were statistically narrow. 15. Chance Vought F-7U Cutlass, United States, 1954. The F-7U Cutlass was among the most radical carrier aircraft ever placed in U.S. Navy frontline service. Its tailless, sharply swept design required a steep nose-high approach attitude to carrier decks that severely restricted forward visibility during landing, the most critical and unforgiving phase of carrier aviation. Its Westinghouse engines were chronically underpowered and prone to failure. Of 320 aircraft built, approximately 25% were destroyed in accidents. 4 test pilots died during development. 14 pilots were lost in operational service. The aircraft was withdrawn after 4 years. Among carrier aviators, it was remembered not with sentiment, but with relief. 16. McDonnell F-3H Demon, United States, 1956. The F-3H Demon was designed around the Westinghouse J-40 engine, a development program that failed comprehensively, producing engines that delivered far below their specified thrust and suffered repeated catastrophic failures in flight. Early Demon aircraft, powered by the J-40, were so dangerously underpowered that several were lost during trials. The J-40 program was eventually canceled and the Demon re-engined with the Allison J-71, partially restoring viability. But the early loss of aircraft and pilots during the J-40 phase was permanent. The Demon stands as one of the clearest examples of how a failed engine development program translates directly and measurably into aircrew fatalities. 17. Northrop F-89 Scorpion, United States, 1950. The F-89 Scorpion was America's primary all-weather interceptor of the early Cold War, the aircraft tasked with finding and destroying Soviet nuclear bombers before they reached American cities. Beneath that critical mission profile lay a structural problem that was only discovered after aircraft began breaking apart in flight. Wing fatigue failures caused outer wing panels to separate during high-load maneuvers, resulting in fatal crashes. The entire fleet required urgent modification. For a period, USAF pilots were flying nuclear intercept missions in an aircraft with a documented risk of aerodynamic structural failure, a situation that required no embellishment to be understood as genuinely dangerous. 18. Grumman F-11F Tiger, United States, 1956. The F-11F Tiger holds one of aviation history's most unusual and sobering distinctions. In September 1956, test pilot Tom Attridge fired the aircraft's 20mm cannons during a shallow dive weapons test and flew into his own decelerating gunfire. The Tiger literally shot itself down. Attridge survived, but the incident encapsulated the aircraft's broader character. The Tiger was quickly superseded by more capable designs, saw limited frontline service, and its performance never matched contemporary alternatives. It became a footnote in carrier aviation history, remembered primarily for an accident that no operational planning had anticipated or could have fully prevented. 19. Yakovlev Yak-38, Soviet Union, 1976. The Yak-38 was the Soviet Navy's first operational vertical takeoff and landing combat aircraft, deployed aboard Kiev-class carriers into the 1970s and 1980s. Its performance envelope was severely constrained: limited payload, minimal combat radius, and engine reliability that degraded significantly in hot or high-altitude conditions. The aircraft was equipped with an automatic ejection system that activated without pilot input when engine parameters exceeded defined limits, a system that reflected the design team's own assessment of how frequently those limits might be breached. Soviet operational evaluations described its combat utility as marginal. The pilots flew it knowing the aircraft itself might decide when the flight was over. 20. Panavia Tornado, United Kingdom/Germany/Italy, 1979. The Panavia Tornado was a capable multi-role strike aircraft that served 3 NATO nations across 4 decades. But its RAF GR1 variant accumulated a significant accident rate during low-level training operations in the 1980s and early 1990s, the result of a doctrine that demanded high-speed flight at very low altitude in all weather conditions. Between 1979 and 2003, the RAF lost over 100 Tornado aircraft in accidents. The aircraft's demanding low-level performance envelope, combined with terrain-following radar that had operational limitations in certain conditions, placed enormous workload on 2-man crews. It was not an inherently dangerous design. It was a demanding machine operated in demanding conditions at the edge of its margins. 21. McDonnell Douglas F-A-8 Hornet, United States, 1983. The F-A-18 Hornet became the backbone of U.S. Navy and Marine Corps tactical aviation and served with distinction across multiple conflicts. But its accident record across 4 decades of operation reflects the inherent risks of high-performance carrier aviation. The U.S. Navy has acknowledged consistent Class A mishap rates with the Hornet throughout its service life, with fatalities occurring across training, carrier operations, and combat deployments. Several accidents were attributed to engine foreign object ingestion, hydraulic failures, and the unforgiving nature of carrier approach at low speed. The Hornet's record is not extraordinary. It is the baseline reality of sustained high-intensity naval aviation. 22. Lockheed Martin F-22 Raptor, United States, 2005. The F-22 Raptor is the most capable air superiority fighter ever built, and it nearly suffocated its own pilots. Between 2008 and 2011, multiple F-22 pilots reported hypoxia-like symptoms during flight, including disorientation, cognitive impairment, and memory loss. At least one fatal crash in 2010 involving Captain Jeffrey Haney was linked to oxygen system issues, though official findings focused on pilot response. The entire F-22 fleet was grounded in 2011, while the onboard oxygen generating system was investigated. For the world's most advanced fighter to ground itself over a life support failure was an operational and reputational crisis with no precedent in modern American aviation. 23. Eurofighter Typhoon, UK/Germany/Spain/Italy, 2003. The Eurofighter Typhoon is one of Europe's premier combat aircraft, a highly agile, fly-by-wire multi-role fighter with an advanced electronic warfare suite. But its accident record has included several fatal crashes linked to technical malfunctions, software anomalies, and system failures in flight. A 2019 crash at a German air show killed the pilot due to an ejection system malfunction. Spanish Typhoons have experienced incidents involving uncommanded flight control inputs. The aircraft is not categorically unsafe, but in a platform where software governs every flight parameter, any system failure has immediate and irreversible consequences. The margin between performance and catastrophe in fly-by-wire aircraft is measured in milliseconds. 24. Sukhoi Su-57 Felon, Russia, 2020. Russia's Su-57 is its first 5th-generation stealth fighter, entering limited service with the Russian Aerospace Forces in 2020 after a troubled development spanning nearly 2 decades. A prototype crashed in December 2019 during a test flight in Siberia, attributed to a flight control system malfunction, an incident that delayed final acceptance into service. Questions about the reliability of its AL-41F-1 engines, the maturity of its avionics integration, and the pace of serial production have been raised by independent defense analysts, including the International Institute for Strategic Studies. With fewer than 20 aircraft confirmed in service as of 2024 and ongoing development issues, the Su-57's operational safety record remains incompletely documented and analytically uncertain. 25. HAL Tejas, India, 2016. India's HAL Tejas is a domestically developed light combat aircraft that entered limited service with the Indian Air Force after one of the longest development programs of any modern fighter, approximately 3 decades from initial design to operational clearance. The aircraft achieved initial operational clearance in 2016 and final operational clearance in 2019, with ongoing software and systems upgrades continuing beyond that point. Its extended development timeline has raised questions about systems maturity in operational conditions. While the Tejas has not accumulated a significant accident record, its deployment with known limitations under operational clearance conditions reflects the calculated risk that modern air forces accept when fielding aircraft that are still being refined in active service. 26. Chengdu J-20 Mighty Dragon, China, 2017. China's J-20 entered service with the People's Liberation Army Air Force in 2017 as Beijing's first operational stealth fighter. It is powered by interim Russian AL-31F engines, while China's domestic WS-15 engine completes development, a dependency that independent analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies have noted limits the aircraft's supercruise capability and full performance envelope. The operational accident record of the J-20 is not publicly documented, consistent with China's strict information controls over military aviation incidents. What is known is that a frontline stealth fighter operating on interim propulsion represents an acknowledged performance compromise, a gap between declared capability and verified operational reality. 27. Boeing FA-18EF Super Hornet, United States, 1999. The FA-18EF Super Hornet extended the Hornet's carrier aviation lineage into a larger, more capable airframe. But across its operational life, the Super Hornet has been involved in multiple fatal accidents tied to structural fatigue, cockpit pressurization failures, and the persistent risks of carrier operations. A 2020 U.S. Navy Inspector General assessment raised concerns about aging aircraft readiness rates across the Super Hornet fleet, with the Navy relying heavily on Super Hornets. While F-35C deliveries continue, older airframes are being flown at higher than planned operational tempo, a condition that historically accelerates fatigue accumulation and increases the probability of structural incidents in carrier aviation. 28. Lockheed Martin F-35 ABC Lightning II, United States, 2015. The F-35 Lightning II is the most expensive weapons program in human history and one of the most technically complex aircraft ever built. Across its 3 variants, the F-35 has accumulated a significant incident and accident record during development and early operational service. Structural cracks were identified in the bulkhead of F-35 aircraft in 2019. The F-35B's lift fan system has experienced failures during developmental testing. A 2020 F-35C crash on USS Carl Vinson during a landing resulted in the aircraft sinking in the South China Sea. The Government Accountability Office has documented hundreds of unresolved software deficiencies across the program. The F-35 is not a failed aircraft. It is an aircraft still resolving the consequences of having been designed at the absolute frontier of what engineering and software integration could achieve in its era. If you enjoyed this content, and if you noticed any mistake, please let us know in the comments below. Tell us which topic you want to see in the next video by writing it in the comment box. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful aviation documentaries.